Welcome back to the Baby in the Crib. This is clip number 10. There's two people I'm going to talk about on this one. It's going to be a short clip, though. The first one is Margurite Young. Going back through her records, I just wanted to point out some of the trips. Now, there was a few after the kidnapping that she made trips to back to Germany. There was one in 1931. Well, that was before. That one, it states, it's May of 1931. It states she came here by herself. It lists on the record that she was going to be staying with her sister in New York and that she was here for 6 months, for a 6-month visit. Well, we know that she didn't go back. She stayed here and then got a job with the Morrows. In the FBI files, it lists her as living in a boarding house in Inglewood. Now, I came across a record when I was doing the research on her that shows when she had gone to, on one of the trips back to Germany, that she listed, I believe it was the trip in 1933. She listed that she lived at 869 Riverside Drive. And she listed the years as residing there from 1931 to 1933. So, Riverside, and that Riverside Drive in New York. She had told the police that she had lived in Inglewood. So I don't know why, she listed that she was from New York. Well, she was originally from New York, but this shows from the years of 31 to 33 at Riverside Drive. Like I said, there was a few that she made. Two of the trips out of the three, she was alone. The one trip she traveled with her husband, but two of them she was alone. The first one she had taken was by herself. Then there's another trip in... You have to excuse me one second. I'm looking at my records because there's so many different dates here. There was another trip that she made that her address is listed as 219 East 50th Street in New York. Now, on that one, she lists that she lived there from 1931 to 1935. So it overlaps in addresses, but it doesn't... Between 1931 and 32, she was employed by the Morrows. Nothing comes up that she was living in Inglewood. Also, there was a trip in 1937. Now, I know this is way past the kidnapping date, but in 1937, she takes a trip alone to Germany. I mean, her father, he was back and forth to Germany, and it's unclear. He might have been there. Maybe he was ill and she was visiting him. But between 1937 and 1939, she resided in the Waldorf Astoria Hotel. And it doesn't look like she was employed there. It listed it as her address. Now, later on, I believe it was in it might have been around 1940, the early 1940s. And I know I'm going way ahead, but I just wanted to show how over the years, her last address was 225 Fifth Avenue. So, at that time, in fact, that time she was divorced. She's listed as being divorced. But she made quite a few trips back to Germany. And I wanted to point this out because later on in the clips, I'm going to talk about another trip to Germany. And this falls in... there was one trip, the one that I'm going to talk about, these dates fall in between that trip. So we'll get back to her. Now, the next one I want to talk about is Charles Ellerson. And it's funny that I'm talking about them together, and I didn't do this purposely. But Charles Ellison, he was employed by the Morrows also. He was hired about a year before the kidnapping had taken place. He was a new hire. Originally, he was hired for gardener and gatekeeper, and then he turned out to be a chauffeur for them. Now, if he was involved, the scary part, and I think I've said this before, the scary part is that he used to drive the baby back and forth to his daycare center. I'm sure that if he, he was, if he was planted, and it seems like he maybe was, he was there to just keep an eye on the goings on, who comes into the house and all of that stuff. But I don't think the plan was to snatch the baby from there. They would have knew right away who did it. But yeah, he worked there. Now, he was known to be a drinker. During the investigation of the Lindbergh baby, people that were questioned, the night of the kidnapping, he was in a bar all drunk, and he had an awful lot of cash that night, so they seemed suspicious of him. But I dug into his background, and he was from Jersey City. He lived downtown with his family. If you look into his records, his dad, in the early 1900s, or it might have been like 1890 something, almost 1900, his dad was a boxer. Now, I mentioned that he was an amateur boxer. Looking through records, I came across a photo of him as a boxer, and it's done professionally. So chances are, he had taken that career seriously. My thinking is that they knew Haig, because Haig in his early years was training for, to be a boxer, which is funny because Dr. Condon, like I mentioned before, in New York, he was heavy into the boxing. So it's very likely that these three guys knew each other. He did the boxing, and as far, I don't see any records actually how long that he did this, but also in 1900, he's listed as a stationary fireman. Now, I'm not really sure what that means. I don't know if he worked for the city as a fireman. Maybe he was like a temporary. I'm not sure what that actually means. But my thinking is that if he was a fireman and he was a boxer, then he definitely knew Frank Haig. Now, here he has a son. The son was listed as a chauffeur as his jobs. He was married. He had a daughter. And it seemed like he jumped around a lot, from jobs. But he winds up in the Morrow household. Now, they suspected in the beginning that maybe he had something to do with it because he knew the layout of the Lindbergh house. The night he took Betty Gale down, when she was called down there because the baby was sick and that they were going to stay, he was the one. And in fact, in some records, it said that he volunteered to take her down there. In other records, it says that he was asked by the butler to take her down. So it's unclear. But anyway, he knew the layout. He knew how to get there. He knew where the house was. Could it be that he was planted there just for information? I mean, he could have passed on to someone how to get to the house. Shortcuts, whatever have you. And I mean, if they seen him in the area, I mean, if there was another time that he brought Betty down and dropped her off and then he just cruised the neighborhood, if anybody spotted him, it wouldn't be suspicious because he's their chauffeur. But anyway, now, for me, doing the research that I'm doing, like I said, I don't do it with legwork to get out and go here and go there. My searching is all done on the internet because I'm searching, like I said, from a different point. I mean, I'm not trying to solve the Lindbergh baby kidnapping case. I'm just trying to make sense of what I experienced. And so anyway, doing the research on him, I did a family tree. I do a family tree on all of them because to me it's important. And every one that I've done so far, I found a connection to something, someone, another person in the mix here. And the same with Charles Ellerson. Doing the family tree, I started to see certain names that looked familiar. And it turns out that he comes back in the same family tree as Josephine Bennett. Okay, there's 3 people. Correction on that. Margurite Junge. Although Margurite Junge and Josephine Bennett's tree intertwines also. So, but it comes back to matching 3 of the people in both, they have these 3 people in both their trees. The family name of Coffin, Gardner, and Beach. I didn't go crazy with this tree. It's large. Margurite Junge's tree is very large. As soon as I made those connections, that was good enough for me. He was suspected of being like a, I don't know what you would call him. I don't believe that the police at that time believed that he kidnapped the baby, but he was like an informant. Now, was he placed in the household? It was said that I believe in one of the ransom notes, it was said that the kidnapping was planned for a year. Now you have him that was employed for just about a year with the Morrow. You have Margurite Junge. She was employed just about a year with the Morrows. So were these 2 people planted in there? Both of them can be traced back to the family that was in question, starting with Robert, that was in St. Louis. They're coming back to the same family tree. Now, that doesn't, like I keep saying, it doesn't mean that any of these people did anything wrong, but it's just a coincidence that the same names keep popping up and all coming from the same family that's located in Jersey City. So, a little bit more than a coincidence here. Okay, so also on Charles Ellerson, when I was doing the research, I came across a record. Now, it's very unclear if this was even him, but I did come across a record where the 2 first names, him and his wife, were the same. The last name could have very well been Ellerson, that was all chopped up. I looked at the record and it just is not clear, but this record comes out of Orange, New Jersey. Now, from doing a lot of research, I noticed that some of the family members, I shouldn't say family members, some of the people that I was looking into, a lot of them were from Newark and in later years moved into Irvington and Orange, East Orange and Orange. If you remember correctly, from earlier clips, I mentioned about Everest and Elizabeth Kirstead, the daughter, Elizabeth's daughter, Florence Adele, living in Orange. She was married to the Robert Bennett. They moved from Jersey City into Orange. But anyway, to get back to this, I found a record that showed that could very well have been them. That was dated. Now the census are done April 1st of each year. So if that record is correct, it shows that Ellerson would have moved from Inglewood into Orange 1 month after the kidnapping. Now, if it's correct, why did he do that? The name that it shows where these people lived, none of the names looked familiar. It doesn't mean that this building could have been owned by someone and just rented out to them. But, you know, on that, I'm just assuming that it could be him. I'm not saying that it is. But then in later years, he winds up in Patterson. Him and his wife moved to Patterson. It looks like maybe she had family that lived in Patterson, but he got out of the area. I mean, Inglewood, between Inglewood and Patterson, it's not all that far away. But that's where he wound up. And then I believe, I'm trying to remember, it wasn't Patterson where he passed away. It was somewhere closer down to, like, say, Hackensack, in that area. But he stayed in that area then the next 20 years or so.